Are you guys ready? Alright, let's begin. Mario, first game. You're playing with the black pieces, so let me flip the board and we see your beloved Taimanov Sicilian, or well, kind of through a move transposition here, a little bit of a sideline here. Knight takes c6, takes. This variation is not that critical for black, I believe. Here you go queen c7, which is a logical move, and I think also a move you prefer to play in different situations, but d5 is just strong here, and I think it immediately equalizes for black, and I think that even white has to be precise already, because the main line here for white is to take on d5 and then to play bishop b5 check here, but just bishop d7, and black is so comfortable already here. Nothing to worry about, one more center pawn than white and comfortable position. And if white takes on d5, which also has been played quite a lot, then already here he's worse. If he castles this bishop b7, immediately this is unpleasant to deal with, this checkmate threat. And if bishop e2 to meet queen takes g2 with bishop a3, well, black just exchanges queens and he has a very comfortable endgame due to his extra center pawn here, with which he can control important squares in the center. So I think d5 you might want to check out here. Seems to be just equalizing very comfortably for black. Okay, queen c7, bishop e3. Here you go bishop e7. This to me seems a little bit too timid. I would prefer a more direct approach. Once again, either d5 right away, or maybe bishop b4 check, knight c3, and now d5. This is not as great as it was a move earlier, but I think this is still pretty decent. Now after e takes d5 you would need to play bishop takes c3, because after c takes d5 there's queen a4 check, but here this also should be just fine for black. Because when we look at how the game developed from now, it seems that you come under a little bit of pressure, and this pressure is due to your lack of space a little bit, I would say. So castle, castle, knight to c3, bishop b7, f4, d6, rook c1. Here I like your move queen a5 to activate the queen. This is all good, but here you just make a choice that leads to an inferior position. You play queen h5. And yeah, the endgame would be quite uncomfortable if your opponent had found the right way. So e5, as you also pointed out, is a better move. And I think this move makes a lot of sense, because there are always these ideas in the air that white might play with e5, maybe play with f5. And with e5 you clarify the situation in the center. That's the move you want to play. You want to gain some more space, take his squares away from the white pieces. And one important point here is that f5, which is the typical response I would say to e5, can be answered with d5. And now all your pieces are placed very well to support this push. Okay, so this looks quite promising. Okay, and I'm just having an eye on the chat as well, Mario. If you want to chime in there with anything, then just you can do so. Okay. Also of the other moves here, if I think you gave a line of g3, but g3 already looks awkward to me because it weakens the king, and this doesn't look that promising. And you gave a line here, rook a b8, rook fe8. Okay, this looks completely fine for me with black. g3 and h3 look like strange moves. In either case, yes, e5. And I think the cause of the mistake here is that you missed this possibility of e5 here by white. I would say this is what you missed, and you didn't consider that your knight might end up in trouble on h5, or it might be awkward at least to get back into the game. Now white is threatening already to win the knight. Common situation, I'm sure you are familiar with that, but somehow this e5 move, I think, did not cross your mind, and that you might be in some trouble here. So I think this is just about looking for candidate moves of your opponent, taking everything into consideration. Because yes, you're right, if you can get your knight back into f6, should be okay. Maybe a tiny bit worse because white has more space, and you can still go for maybe c5, maybe e5, maybe f5. Has some breaks available, but not much is going on, right? So yes, I would just say little calculation error here. Rook fd1 was played. Now you go e5, which is great, and the next moves I don't really have anything to say. Your opponent is so kind to give his bishop, and here bishop g5 is great to activate your dark squared bishop, which doesn't have a counterpart, and get the bishop to nice squares here. Here you go rook f to d8, which I also think is completely fine, bishop f3, and now you play a5. I think, yeah, all the next moves are also very reasonable. Here you could also go g6, as you pointed out. I think this is an interesting idea also later on, just to have more options to be able, if necessary, to take on f5. And if white takes himself, then it opens another file. Because in general, this will be your problem in the game, to get files for your rooks, to get into the white position, because the position is rather closed right now, and you need to be able to activate these rooks sooner or later. Okay, so g6 is also an interesting option, but I also like a5, rook to d3, bishop d4, knight to a4, rook a b8. I also like b3, but now it seems you're a little bit without a clear plan. You go bishop a6, and I'm not sure what the bishop is supposed to do here, really. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think it's doing anything there. And later on, you also move it back to c8 and to d7. Well, you could have saved yourself a lot of time if you went for this idea immediately. Play c5, go bishop c6, and then you always have this idea to open up files with a4. And yes, you're giving away the square on d5, and yes, white can bring a knight to d5. But let's just give a sample line here, knight c3. He can bring the knight to d5, but you'll just take the knight and you still have some pressure. Of course, it won't be easy to win this position with the opposite colored bishops, but you're the only one pressing, because your bishop is much stronger and will remain much stronger than the light square bishop of white. So this seems promising. The only question is how much of a threat is to play a4, because then white takes with the knight, and you have to carefully evaluate this. So what I looked at here was just improve the position of the king, maybe something like this, bring the king to e7, and at some point you can play a4, and maybe you can prepare with rook b4 and just see what's happening. And if white goes knight d5, then you can just take. And if white takes with the e pawn, you have a protected passed pawn on e5. And if he takes with the c pawn, then once again, maybe play rook b4, maybe a4 immediately. There are chances definitely to do something here. Not winning, of course, but this is a little bit of an advantage for black. So here, after you played a lot of sensible moves, it seems to me that you didn't really know what to do next. Yeah. Okay, let's see how the game developed. Rook to d1. I see what you want to do. You want to go d5, yeah? But this is just, it's just one move creating a threat, and then if your opponent parries it, what next, right? So this doesn't really help you. Those are like cheapos, I would say, which don't really help you. You can go for cheapos, but they should always be embedded in a greater plan, right? Where you actually are doing something, because here now you put your bishop on a6, but it's just nothing there, I think. Okay, king f8, g4, king to e7, king g2, and now you bring the bishop to c8. But here, in fact, bishop c8 allows white to go c5. And I think even here already you should have played c5 yourself, because white in this position is able to play c5, and that would alleviate some of his pressure, that would help his position. So here it seemed that you were not really too aware of white's options to do something himself. And this is really the only pawn break you need to watch out for in this position. Of course, white could do something with h4 and g5, but it's not very immediate and it wouldn't change the position, the pawn structure that much right now. So you want to check for c5 and if it's any good, and especially with the bishop dropping back to c8, c5 becomes a very possible option, right? So just playing c5 here, or maybe rook b4, something along these lines, would have been better to not give white this chance. He did not take it though, he played h3 and now bishop d7, and here once again c5 once again was just good. Actually here even better, because you can't even go d5, the pawn would be just hanging. And what do you do now? You don't want to take, but well, if you play bishop e8, the knight comes to c5. Here I think white is just equalized comfortably because your structure has suffered. So you need to look for active moves. I know it has been a lot of maneuvering in the last few moves, but always check for these moves that change the pawn structure. Pawn moves always, you need to be aware of them and if they are any dangerous to you. Okay, your opponent did not play this, he played knight c3, rook b4. Now you are increasing the pressure here, you found a better setup with the bishop on d7. Now a4 is threatening, rook bishop to d1, a4. a4 is definitely a good move, but I'm wondering if maybe it's about time again to consider g6, to open a second front, because this is also a common concept in endgames, the idea of two weaknesses. So here we could say, well, there's no clear weakness yet on the queen side, but there will be something along with a4, or just this whole setup seems kind of loose with a4 coming and some tactical ideas. But then the question is, well, white is able to defend the queen side, so you need to open up a second front to create another weakness. And a weakness doesn't necessarily have to be a pawn, it can also just be a file where you can invade maybe into the white position, and that file could be, for example, the g file. So g6, or the f file if white takes on g6. So I think g6 is definitely a very interesting move here to consider, because you're not really in that much of a rush to force matters. Let's see the game. a4, rook cc1, and here I think you were too materialistic. I would say you go for the exchange. Yes, it's attractive, winning an exchange, but the position becomes very hard to win afterwards. I think it would have been much more practical to just take on b3. If now white takes with the rook, with the bishop, he will have a terrible pawn structure, obviously, with these pawns isolated, and he has to defend them for the rest of the game. Of course, still not that easy to win, but you can try, you can pressure, you still can play g6, maybe even h5. Well, g6 looks a little bit more sensible, and you will try for a long time. This looks very promising. If he takes with the pawn though, now again you can go for g6. And this is what I was just mentioning, pretty much same situation. Now black has this weakness, he has to defend. He doesn't have great squares for his pieces, and you have the a file open. If necessary, maybe you can use it, but this will also be very uncomfortable for white. And I think practically this is much more difficult to play than the other position, and that's something you want to consider in your games. What is maybe not the best objectively, but what is the most uncomfortable for my opponent to play? And this would be more uncomfortable, and this is a concept in which Magnus Carlsen really excels. He doesn't always play the best moves, but he plays the moves where he thinks this will pose the most problems to my opponent. And this is really what chess is about, to posing practical problems, and then at some point the opponent won't be able to solve them. Of course, most of the time the best moves lead to the best problems, to the greatest problems, but sometimes it's not necessarily like that. And in this situation, it's not even clear if bishop e3 is objectively a better move. So here you win the exchange, yes, but the position stays close and you don't have open files for your rooks. And this makes it difficult to convert this extra exchange. Okay, rook to d8. Yeah, I'm not sure where you're going with this. I would rather play the rook to a8. This seems like a useful file here. Knight c3, g6, bishop f3, and then maybe bishop e8. And you can try to get the bishop to maybe play with f6, take on f5 first, bring the bishop to f7, and then you have to see. You have to see what you can do. Maybe at some point a break with d5 would be possible. Maybe using the g5 would be possible. It won't be easy to get through. It won't be easy, but this seems to me more sensible than this setup you chose here. So let's see where you're going for. And yeah, this was really a very confusing moment for me. You just played bishop a6, and I thought, okay, he obviously wants to take on c4, right? And then your opponent plays king f2. I'm like, what is going on? White is just ignoring bishop takes c4, and now you don't take. So I was very confused. I don't know if you want to comment on it. Maybe you were already low on time here, but I was very confused because bishop takes c4 just picks up a pawn, and then if you pick up this pawn, you can play d5, and now you pretty much have an easy win. And I don't see any problem, any tactic or any idea that white has here to not play bishop takes c4. So I don't know. If you want to, you can write something about it. All right. And I'm seeing in the chat you had the wrong impression leaving the d5 square without the pawn cover. Oh, you didn't. You're saying you didn't see this idea of playing e5. Ah, you didn't see e5 by white, I'm guessing you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'm not quite sure how to read your other comment that you didn't want to leave the d5 square without a pawn cover, but you have the c6 pawn covering and the e6 pawn covering. So I guess I understand now. You didn't want to play c5. Okay, you didn't want to allow this knight to come to d5. Okay, this makes sense. And I need to drink something because I'm getting a little bit dry. All right, let's get back to it. And you're saying, okay, you were short on time, but still, I mean, even if you're short on time, you should see something like this in 5 seconds, or 10 seconds. Maybe this sounds a little bit harsh, but there should be no excuse for not seeing bishop takes c4. So you might want to, yeah, do some tactics, because this is where, you know, this is where the game is decided, more or less. If you play bishop takes c4, you have an easy win, pretty much. You should have an easy win. And if you don't go bishop takes c4, if you don't take advantage of these chances when they present themselves on a gift plate, as we would say in German, your opponent is giving you the gift right here, playing king f2, ignoring this, well, then it becomes much more difficult, right, to win this. And as we'll see, you won't be able to in this game. Okay, rook a8, knight c3, rook to d8. Okay, just some back and forth moving. I'm not even sure if white is not playing for one, because you're just repeating moves, but he's playing something else. Okay, let's see. King to d1, rook back. So not much is happening here. And now you're taking on f5. I'm wondering if it's maybe a little bit early. You don't need to alleviate the tension already. You could play a move like bishop b7, rook to a8, again rook to d8, hinting at playing d5, maybe move your king. And black always has to consider that you take on f5. And actually the problem with taking on f5 is here in this position, is that white could take with the e-pawn quite well, open up his bishop, and here would be also very difficult to do something. Actually, your advantage has decreased here, I would say. Yeah, what are you going to do? White keeps all the pressure on d5. You cannot play d5, and yeah, this would have been very tough as well. So I think just a little bit too early here to take on f5. But okay, we have to consider it was a rapid game, and of course you didn't have that much time left. So let's see what is happening here. I would say exchanging a rook is definitely helpful for you. In general, if you're an exchange up in the end game and your opponent still has a rook, you want to trade it because then he has much less counterplay. In general, that's a general rule of thumb. So that was good. Still, you cannot get in because white is covering all the entry squares. So let's see how this goes. And here I looked a little bit. You play king e7 now, which of course is possible, but soon the game ends in a draw. So we can see the last few moves here, and you decide to make a draw, which is within reason, of course, here, because yes, it's tough to do something. And I checked a little bit what you could do, but there are some ideas and you should definitely try, because it's for white, you're not risking much unless you really want to. And for white can go wrong, right? For example, here you gave a line if white puts the bishop on g6. Doesn't look unreasonable, but now he doesn't have the chance to defend against d5 anymore. And sooner or later you can push d5, and if you can push d5 under good circumstances, you have a very good winning chance, as you show here with this line. Still work to be done, but if the position opens up, your rook becomes strong and white shouldn't be able to defend. So white probably needs to keep passive here. And here I thought, okay, the only idea is to bring the king somehow. I want to get the king coming here, but then could be the problem that sometimes this pawn is a weakness. For example, we could imagine a knight coming to g4, something like this. So we have to be careful. And one line I looked at here, of course with the help of the computer, is to keep the knight bound to this pawn and then put the rook to a3 so that knight a4 is not annoying if king b6, and then bring the king to c5. And here just gets double edged because, okay, white has to do something, otherwise black is too active, and he can go for the f6 pawn. On the other hand, black is also getting this pawn on b3, and still unclear because white has a strong passed pawn, but it looks like black has good chances here. In either case, just what I want to say is that you can try, and white has to be the one who has to be covered. But of course, not an easy position to play with not a lot of time on the clock. Still, just play some moves. I'm not sure which time format it was, if you were getting extra time, if it was with increment or with delay. If it was with delay, then I understand it's very hard because, yes, if you overdo it, you could lose this position as well. So, all right. Now, I think the critical moment really here was that you missed this very, very simple tactic with bishop takes c4. And before that, the point I would emphasize is this practical decision. Do I take the exchange? Yes, I'm up material. I probably won't lose. There's a very low risk, but it also makes it very hard to win. Or do I not take the material, just keep the advantages I have in the position, the bishop pair, and this very strong dark squared bishop, which was just dominating the board, and then keep on playing like that. And really, you could argue in this position, the bishop was stronger than a rook because the bishop was on d4, controlling the whole board, whereas the rook was just passive. So these are the points I would like to emphasize from this game. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll check the chat once more. And you're saying, yes, that you understand you couldn't improve my position after winning the exchange. At least it's very difficult, right? I could even imagine that objectively the computer might hold it with white already. In a practical game, of course, you have chances, but it's just much more difficult. And like I said, you want to play the moves that pose the most practical problems to your opponent. That's just a key thing to consider, and also something that I didn't always have in my mind. Because you think always, okay, let's play the best moves, let's take the materials, let's take the material if we can. But it's also about to see what will remain in the position and if you can still win, and if it gives you a good chance to win this. All right,